Welcome to The Explainer. So today we are going to completely shatter one of the most widely taught historical myths out there. I mean, you were probably taught in school that right around 476 AD, the Roman Empire was just wiped off the map, right? Swept away by barbarian hordes, plunging all of Europe into the Dark Ages. But honestly, that is, at best, a half-truth. Let's dive right in, because the reality is the Roman Empire absolutely did not die in 476 AD. A vibrant, incredibly golden eastern half actually survived, thrived, and held the line for literally another 1,000 years.
So, did it really fall? We really need to reframe how we think about this. You see, to the people living in this thriving eastern half, the collapse of Rome over in the west was just, well, a distant political disaster. And here's a crazy fact. They didn't ever call themselves Byzantines. That's just a label invented by historians centuries later. They called themselves Romans. And they continued this grand experiment for another 10 centuries, standing as the wealthiest, most scientifically advanced civilization on Earth, all while the West was really struggling.
Which brings us to Section 1, the Great Split and the ultimate real estate move.
To understand how they pulled this off, we have to go back to the late 3rd century. Emperor Diocletian realized that running this sprawling, massive empire was just an absolute logistical nightmare. His big solution? Split it right down the middle. But man, the West got a truly terrible deal. It was muddy, sparsely populated, essentially bankrupt, and had these incredibly long, exposed borders along the Rhine and Danube rivers. The East, though, that was the economic heart of the ancient world. It had all the wealthy trade routes, the massive grain fields of Egypt, and booming populations. So in 330 AD, Emperor Constantine the Great made the ultimate real estate decision. He packed up and relocated the capital away from Rome over to the wealthy East, creating the megacity of Constantinople.
And let me tell you, that decision was brilliant. Not just economically, but geographically. That brings us to Section 2, the Shield of Stone and Sea.
Constantinople is basically a peninsula, completely protected by treacherous water currents on 3 of its sides. That meant there was only a narrow, 5-kilometer stretch of land left to defend. To lock that down, they built the Theodosian Walls. Just imagine being a medieval invading army having to face this absolute nightmare of a gauntlet. First, you'd have to cross a 20-meter wide moat, all while under heavy fire. If you somehow survive that, you hit a low breastwork swarming with archers. Manage to get over that, well, now you're trapped in a killing zone right in front of a 9-meter outer wall. And if, by some absolute miracle, you scale that, you're suddenly looking straight up at the inner wall, which is 12 meters high, 5 meters thick, and packed with 96 massive towers just raining heavy artillery down on your head.
The sheer intimidation factor of these walls was completely off the charts. I mean, the legendary Attila the Hun, who was literally crushing everything in his path, marched right up to them in 447 AD, took one look at this engineering marvel, and just turned his entire army around. No thank you. And get this, when a massive earthquake actually knocked down parts of those walls later that very same year, the citizens panicked, sure, but they mobilized so fast that they rebuilt the entire system in just 60 days. That's right, 60 days, long before Attila could even think about coming back.
But hey, stone walls are just a defensive shield, right? If you want to survive a millennium, you've got to project force. Let's look at Section 3, Secret Weapons and Military Genius.
This is easily one of the most fascinating parts of their survival strategy. The Eastern Romans had a highly classified, state-secret technology invented by a refugee named Callinicos. It was called Greek fire. This stuff was basically the ancient world's napalm. It was a liquid incendiary that they literally pumped through bronze tubes mounted on their ships. But the truly terrifying genius of it? It was hydrophobic. It actually burned right on top of the water. If an enemy panicked and tried to put it out with water, the flames just spread faster. It was an absolute game changer, single-handedly stopping 2 major Arab sieges in the 7th and 8th centuries. The recipe was so heavily guarded that, to this very day, its exact chemical composition remains a total mystery.
Beyond their secret weapons, they also totally revolutionized how their army operated. The old-school Roman system of paying massive professional standing legions, yeah, that became way too expensive. So they rolled out what's known as the theme system. They divided the empire into military districts, called themes. Local farmers were handed free land, and in exchange, they provided hereditary military service. This was an absolute stroke of administrative genius. It replaced those pricey standing armies with cheap, highly motivated locals who were ready to fight at a moment's notice simply because they were defending their own homes and their own crops.
But you know, why fight at all if you can just manipulate your enemies into fighting each other? Welcome to Section 4, Spies, Diplomacy, and the Emperor's Elite.
The Romans essentially treated diplomacy like a weapon of mass destruction. Enter the Bureau of Barbarians. This was, quite literally, the world's first organized intelligence agency. They gathered meticulous, top-secret data on foreign nations, simmering rivalries, and which enemy generals could easily be bought off. Say a barbarian king was gathering an army to attack Constantinople. The Bureau wouldn't bother sending Roman soldiers. Instead, they'd quietly send a wagon full of gold to that king's neighboring rival tribe. So, before the invading army could even get close to the Roman borders, their own homeland would suddenly be engulfed in a civil war. Pretty wild, right?
And on the rare occasions foreign ambassadors actually visited the capital, the Romans unleashed pure psychological warfare. Imagine an ambassador from a muddy wooden fort walking into the magnificent palace. Suddenly, the emperor's throne would literally levitate into the air using hidden water-powered hydraulics. Golden mechanical lions would start roaring, and golden mechanical birds in the trees would actually sing. It was a total theatrical production designed to make outsiders feel completely overwhelmed, essentially tricking them into believing the Roman emperor ruled over magic itself.
As for the emperor's personal protection, he relied on the Varangian Guard. These guys were massive Viking shock troops. Now you might be wondering, why trust foreign barbarians with the emperor's life? Simple, because they had absolutely zero ties to Roman politics. They didn't care at all about palace coups or what the Senate wanted. They only cared about the giant piles of gold the emperor paid them. In fact, if you visit the Hagia Sophia today, you can still find ancient runic graffiti carved into a marble railing by a bored Viking bodyguard over 1,000 years ago. It literally just translates to, Halfdan was here.
But look, walls and mercenaries can only get you so far. A civilization needs a shared identity to actually last 1,000 years. Let's explore Section 5, the unifying soul, law and faith.
First up is Roman law. Back in the 6th century, Emperor Justinian the Great took centuries of chaotic, completely contradictory rules and cleaned them up into one standardized masterpiece, the Corpus Juris Civilis, or the Justinian Code. And this wasn't just ancient bookkeeping. Justinian cemented foundational concepts that we literally still rely on today, things like being innocent until proven guilty and the fundamental right to a fair trial. This code meant that no matter where you lived in this massive empire, you were bound by the exact same rules of fairness.
The other crucial half of that unifying soul was Orthodox Christianity. They had this concept called symphonia. It was the harmonious partnership between the state, which was the emperor, and the church, represented by the patriarch. The emperor wasn't just a politician. He was viewed as God's representative on earth. This totally shifted the stakes. It transformed the defense of the empire from a basic political duty into a holy crusade. When severe crises struck, the citizens didn't break. They fought with an almost fanatical resilience because they genuinely believed they were protecting God's chosen empire.
And trust me, they needed every single ounce of that resilience because the existential threats they faced were straight up apocalyptic. This is Section 6, Surviving the Unsurvivable.
Literally any one of these events would have permanently erased most civilizations from the map. In 541 AD, the Justinian plague hit and wiped out a full third of their population, instantly devastating their tax base. Fast forward to 626, and they survived a massive, combined siege by the Persians and the Avars. But the most tragic blow of all came in 1204. Western European crusaders, fellow Christians by the way, were manipulated by greedy Venetian merchants into betraying the empire. They brutally sacked Constantinople, melting down ancient statues and burning priceless libraries. It totally shattered the empire. Yet, against all odds, the Romans refused to die. They waged a gritty 57-year guerrilla war, and in 1261, miraculously snuck right back in and recaptured their city.
But as we all know, every empire, no matter how stubborn or resilient, eventually faces an end. Which brings us to Section 7, the final stand, 1453.
By April of 1453, the empire was a shadow of its former self, geographically shrunken and completely financially drained. The situation was grim. 80,000 Ottoman troops camped outside the walls, against a mere 7,000 Roman defenders trapped inside. And the young Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II brought a terrifying new technology that those ancient stone walls were simply never designed to withstand: massive gunpowder supercannons. One of them was over 8 meters long. For 53 agonizing days, they just relentlessly pounding the great Theodosian walls.
Finally, on May 29, 1453, those legendary walls were breached. The final Roman emperor, Constantine XI Palaiologos, was actually offered a chance to flee to safety. But instead, he stripped off his imperial purple cloak so that he would die completely anonymously alongside his men. His final recorded words were heartbreaking. He said, "The city has fallen and I should live."
With his sword drawn, he charged headfirst into the breach. And just like that, after 1,500 incredible years, the Roman Empire finally fell.
But here's the amazing part. The story doesn't actually end in the rubble of 1453. Let's look at Section 8, Sparking the Renaissance.
See, as the empire was crumbling, hundreds of fleeing Roman scholars managed to escape westward over to Italy. And they definitely didn't go empty-handed. They brought crates stuffed with ancient, lost manuscripts from brilliant minds like Plato, Aristotle, and Euclid. Because the Eastern Romans had so fiercely guarded this ancient knowledge behind their towering walls for 1,000 years, they were able to deliver it back to the West at the exact moment Western Europe was finally ready to receive it. This sudden, massive influx of preserved classical knowledge was the direct spark that ignited the Italian Renaissance.
So when you really think about it, the preservation of Western civilization happened precisely because this eastern half of Rome absolutely refused to die for a millennium. Which leaves us with one final, pretty provocative question to wrap things up. Knowing their completely unbroken lineage, their shared laws, and their unbelievable resilience, should this magnificent civilization really be remembered by some historian-invented term like Byzantine, or have they earned the right to simply be called Roman?
Please like and subscribe.